Friends, Malazans, countrymen, we are going back into the great world of Steven Erikson by reviewing today the first collection of tales of Bauchelain Korbal Broach by the myth, the man, the legend himself, Steven Erikson. Now, if you're not intimately involved with the Malazan world, which a lot of people aren't, and I haven't been for most of my reading history, so no judgment there, it's a little confusing how many different strands and kinds of the different kinds of Malazan books there are. There's the main core Malazan Book of the Fallen. So that's the 10 core, that's where you should start. If you've never read anything, just read those. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that. There is a secondary author and creator of the world called E.N.C. Esselmont, and he has 2 different series that he's working on, the novels of the Malazan Empire and the Paths to Ascendancy trilogy. So those are other things. Steven Erikson also has a prequel series, and like prequel, like 600,000 years before the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And on the side of all of that, Steven Erikson does a couple of fun short stories that he follows these 2 characters, both necromancers, Bauchelain Korbal Broach. Now, if you've read a little bit of the Malazan series, you might recognize those because those are characters in Memories of Ice, the 3rd book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and one of the fan favorites. And these guys feature prominently in some events in that book, which I will not spoil in this video. But outside of the main 10, Erikson, I can tell as I read these stories, kind of uses those 2 characters as outlets for kind of his more odd creative ideas. I think as he's like having to do these larger series, this is kind of fun to get out some ideas because they're all unique, they're all a little different, and to be honest, I think they're very, very fun. I don't know why these aren't talked about more in the Malazan community. Now, that said, they are definitely not to the same level of epicness or I think even entertainment value as a Malazan Book of the Fallen or the Ice books or anything like that, but they're not meant to be. I think these are written really as unique experiments, that Erikson can kind of get out some sides of his writing that he doesn't normally use in his series. So I'll talk about each story individually and what I mean by that, but overall, before we get this, especially if you're a Malazan fan, I'd highly recommend picking these up. You can read them all independently of one another. They do sort of flow together, but not really. So you can, if you're getting really bogged down with Malazan, jump in and read one, or if you're reading other series, like you're reading Robin Hobb, or you're reading some, I don't know, Brandon Sanderson or something, and you kind of miss Malazan, but you don't want to jump into like a reread of the 10, this is a great way to do it, because you still get Erikson's immense creativity, his beautiful prose, and unique characters, and you definitely get a sense that you are in the Malazan world, but each of these are like 100 pages, maybe 150 for the longest ones. So it's really a good bang for your buck from a Malazan experience, and that's why I'm gonna put this in a long recommendation. The only reason it's that low is because I think you should be at least a little familiar with the Malazan world before you get here, and so because you kind of have to have that sort of longer background, I think to get the most out of these and really enjoy these stories, that's the only reason it's ticked down in that. But overall, I really enjoyed them. Some are better than others, definitely, and I'll get to that in a minute. But that's my overall thoughts. You should definitely read these if you haven't, especially if you're a Malazan fan. And after you've read Memories of Ice, you can read all of these. Like, you don't have to wait till the end of the series, the main series, for sure. So the rest of this video, I'm gonna go in spoiler detail through each short story. So if you haven't read these yet, thank you for watching. Jump off. But if you have, let's talk about each of these short stories. The first short story in this collection is called Blood Follows, and this is really an introductory story. It introduces you to a very interesting city, and I do like the sort of murder mystery element of it, where you're mostly following Emancipator Reese, who we know is eventually going to be hired by Bauchelain Korbal Broach as their manservant, because again, in Memories of Ice, he's with them, but he's not there yet, so it's fun to kind of see what that character was before, because we've seen him and what he is going to be. And then there is this kind of like classic private eye detective, and what I meant before about Erikson getting out some oddities in this is kind of like a crime investigation David Lynchy kind of story, which we haven't really gotten ever in the Malazan world, at least what I have read. And so I think Erikson had a fun time with that. And it also gives us a lot of time and introduction, more so to the person of Bauchelain, because we don't really get a lot of that in Memories of Ice, at least to my memory. And it really kind of endeared me to this weird wacko guy, which pays off a lot in some later story, which I will talk to in a little bit. Overall, though, it wasn't amazing, but it was a really fun read. I read it very, very quickly. That's another thing I should have said in the non-spoiler section is, unlike every other Erikson work I've ever read, the perspectives each are kind of like a chapter. So it feels like you're going so fast because you'll see they're super short. Like, that's probably the longest chapter that I just showed you. Most of them are like a page turn. Boom, boom, done. I just like how that's bound like that because it's really easy to read quickly because you feel like you're really going, fast. You're really in the driver's seat. So enjoyed Blood Follows a lot. The next one is called The Lees of Laughter's End. At the end of Blood Follows, again, this is full spoilers, so don't be mad at me. They get on a boat and kind of flee the city, and this is just like everything that can go wrong does. This is like a straight horror tale, but in a comedic sense. It's a comedic horror, kind of, I was gonna say like Scream-like, but not quite that comedic. But it's just kind of silly, because Bauchelain Korbal Broach do terrible, awful things, but like never take themselves incredibly seriously. And I really enjoy that. This is also Emancipator Reese like getting used to that idea, because he's just been employed. And for that reason, it's fun. For me, it's my least favorite of this collection of 3, just because there's no real standout moments for me. There's kind of some gross characters, some gross like body horror stuff, but in the most sense, it's just sort of like a fun tale, but nothing really stuck for me. Like, I can't really even think of a particular moment that stood out for me. The final one is called The Healthy Dead, and this is the one I want to talk about because I think it is brilliant. Some of the best Erikson writing, Erikson has some great writing, but it's up there with his best. The basic idea of this story is that a king has taken over control of a sequestered city called Quaint, and basically has made health a religion. And the main thrust of this story, as I read it and I understand it, is the power of authoritarianism, especially religious authoritarianism, because it's a good idea, right, that you should be healthy, but the authoritarianism mixed up in this good idea sours it and turns it into this awful, gross thing that oppresses, that kills, that destroys. And it's a deep theme, but also just a super fun romp. I don't know how Erikson is able to achieve both of these things, but it's funny, it's page-turning, it's unique, and I think really powerful. Erikson opens with this little quote that I think really kind of focuses down on that authoritarianism. He has this fun phrase at the beginning that I think sums up what he's getting at. Warning to lifestyle fascists everywhere. Don't read this or you'll go blind. And what I think he means by lifestyle fascists are people who, obsess over body image or really any sort of authoritarian thing you put in your mind. It's really like a unique parable for moderation, as the Greeks would say. And I think Erikson does a really, really great job at talking about the golden mean, as Aristotle would say. Basically the idea that you need to stand in between the extremes to be an actual healthy person. And not just healthy in the physical sense, but really in every single attribute. I think Erikson's really pushing for that in this story because he takes the idea of something that is so idolized in our society, health and youth and beauty, and makes it authoritarian and shows like what the evil of that can do. And I think it could be applied not just to health, although that's very important, but to a whole bunch of ideas in our society. I just thought it was brilliant. I loved it. I think this is by far my favorite Bauchelain Korbal Broach story that I've read so far, and the height of this book, and it in itself will make it worth reading this collection. And if you're not interested in these stories at all, I would say just start with The Healthy Dead, because it's so good. Please read it, especially if you're a fan of Malazan. But even if you're not, I think it's like 100 pages. I think it can sell you on why people like Malazan, again, and you're just reading like a 100-page short story. So highly, highly, highly recommend The Healthy Dead. And that's it. Have you read Bauchelain Korbal Broach, the first collection? I will be reading the second collection. Well, actually, it's hard to get your hands on the second collection in a binding like this because Tor is a little bit behind, or whoever publishes this is a little bit behind on that. So I'm gonna probably review each of them separately, and especially to celebrate the release of, on March 16th, as I sit here in 2021, of Fiends of Nymeria, a new binding coming out of that. So I'm really happy I did this. Let me know what you think of these stories. As always, subscribe, like, check out my Patreon, all that kind of stuff. First in, last out.